This is Taking the Lead, a podcast for B2B tech professionals, leaders, and executives who want to learn from female icons in the tech industry. In each episode, host Christina Brady interviews women who are driving revenue for some of the most respected tech companies in the world. Are you ready to get inspired?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Taking the Lead. I am your host, Christina Brady, and like all episodes, I have a wonderful, wonderful individual for you here today to break it all down. Dina Gallay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christina. It's great to be here.
So great to have you. Yes. You are currently a senior specialist in sales enablement at Relativity, but that is only where you are right now. You've had a wonderful journey, done all kinds of crazy things. And so instead of me giving it away, tell us a little bit about your journey, the twists and turns, how you got to where you are.
Yeah, you bet. So yes, I have been in sales enablement at Relativity for just under a year. And prior to that, I spent my entire career in sales and sales leadership, mostly in the consulting space and staffing. And then I was also in technology at LinkedIn for 4 years. So over a year ago, I was a VP of sales. I'd been a VP of sales for 2 companies and, living that VP of sales dream. And then for personal reasons, I needed to take a career pause. And while I was doing that, I started thinking about what I wanted to do when I came back to work. And I had this aha moment. There were a couple of things I knew I didn't want to do. And one was leadership. I no longer wanted to manage people. It was great, but it was just no longer for me. And I no longer wanted a quota. So I started thinking, still love sales, passionate about helping salespeople. So how do I do that without the quota and without leading people? And sales enablement. So I started reaching out to my network to share what I was thinking. And I was lucky to end up at Relativity.
Oh my gosh. I think so many folks, especially when they get started in revenue and in sales, their passion is to go from IC and then either be career salesperson, which that takes such a high amount of grit to be able to do that and hold the bag forever, for lack of a better term. And then, or go into leadership and go into people management. And I think it is so wonderful to hear the perspective of somebody who said, you know what, I realized people leadership isn't for me. Holding a quota isn't for me. What were some of the hints or things that were happening that made you have that level of clarity?
Part of it was at the job before I joined Relativity, I was kind of doing a mixed bag of IC and managing people, and which I hadn't done for many, many years prior. And I realized that doing that IC role, I had more fun doing that. And you start thinking, if you're going to be an impactful people leader, you need to be, you can't do that without passion, right? You have to love that. Otherwise you shouldn't be doing it. And it was subtle at first and actually quite unconscious. But then I realized that I had a lot more joy talking with clients, helping clients. At the time I was working with in consulting, sales consulting. And I loved helping clients figure out where the gaps were and talk about what was going well, so much more than I loved managing the team. And so that was the first, maybe it's time to pass on the people management. And then when I took the break, I thought, sometimes things happen in your life and you just pivot. Mm-hmm. And having a quota is high reward, high risk.
Yes.
And I just didn't want the pressure anymore. So I still wanted to help sales teams without the pressure.
Or a different kind of pressure, because
a different kind of pressure for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. And there is that feeling about when you're holding a quota, whether you're holding that as an individual contributor or a frontline leader or a director or a VP, just this idea of I hold the number and I spend this month, this quarter running at the number, and then when that month is over and it's all said and done, it starts all over.
So that's right. You're never done, right? You're never done.
You're never done, right? Well, so now what you do, though, is you're almost parallel to the revenue teams where you're interacting with their ability to hit the quota and succeed the way that they need to. in a very, very different way, but you're still really, involved and immersed in that. And so how do you feel like folks today, and this is kind of like a larger question, but where's the intersection between where enablement can actually help to support sales reps in hitting their quota? Like, do you feel like enablement is a foundational piece of every single organization that is going to help teams hit their number? Is that sort of the way that you would think about the value of enablement?
I do, for sure. I don't think that all industries have caught up to that type of thinking, but
Yeah.
I think that that's true for sure. So the role of in general, the role of a sales enablement person or a team is to help a sales team be as efficient as possible, help with training, help identify gaps, look for voids in the sales process. And these are all things that in some companies, sales leaders are responsible for doing that. And really, sales leaders should be coaches, right? Coaches and cheerleaders and strategists. And that's where I see the sales enablement is so effective, because it's not only an extension of the sales leadership, but it's a separate role with a slightly same goal, but separate focus.
Well, and you're bringing such the ideal perspective to it, because spending so many years interacting with and implementing and supporting a really specific sales methodology, you're bringing this experience that I think a lot of people who maybe don't have that experience, it may be a gap for them. And so when you think about this idea of we have a sales process, we have a sales methodology, I think a lot of people believe that those are the same things. And in your
They
opinion,
do.
they're like, "Say your process, methodology, whatever." And I'm like, no, those are different things. Tell us in your mind, from the mind of somebody who, one, worked with a company that literally is a sales methodology, two, now enabling teams to do their best work. What are the main differences between those two things?
I love that question. So the overall goal of having a sales process and or a sales methodology is to make the sales team more efficient, right? So you start there. Now, in the broadest difference is that a sales process is the what to do to move through the stages of a deal, and the sales methodology is how to do it.
Yes. Yes. Why do you think that's confused so often?
I don't even know how to answer that. I think they're just used interchangeably.
Interchangeably. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. I mean, I think that a sales rep they need that structure to help them move through the stages and keep them in control of the sales process. And I think that some companies think that providing just that process is enough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's what I think.
Well, it was a tricky question. It was a fastball to throw at you, because I oftentimes see that companies will train with this idea of, well, we have to have a sales methodology, right? Like, we have to have a methodology, we have to pick a lane. And sometimes that's we're going to build our own. And other times it's we're going to bring in a challenger, we're going to bring in a Sandler, we're going to bring in a medic or a med pick. And just the other day, I was actually talking to a company and they said, well, we like people to follow our sales methodology. And I said, okay, well, what is your methodology? And they said, oh, it's medic. I said, okay. And then how does medic interact with your particular process? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, where are they utilizing the methodology within your existing sales process? And they said, well, no, that is kind of the sales process. And I was like, what are the actual stages? And they're like, well, stage 1, stage 2. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there is this like inability for a lot of companies to realize that first, your sales process a lot of times is very, very product specific, and it makes sense for your customers and your buyers. And sales reps, client success managers, BDRs have to understand, what do I do, when, and why? And then we can determine if a methodology makes sense.
Right.
For
Right. I
you,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, you
Yeah.
have to come into a company, and let's say you enter a company that has neither, right? They've never done any kind of formalized sales process training. They've never done any kind of formalized methodology training. Where would you start with a company like that says we need to improve sales?
Yep. So the very first place I would start is with a sales process. And I would go a little further to say, do you have a sales process with defined activities and
Mm.
exit criteria? Because a lot of companies don't, right? And so ideally it lives in your CRM, but somewhere does everybody on your sales team understand how to move through the sales stages And are they following these guidelines? So for example, let me think of a good example. A company might say that before you move to demo, you need to confirm that you're talking to the ultimate decision maker, right? So make sure that you're not doing a demo or whatever some people might call that the presentation stage. Make
Yeah.
sure you're not doing that until you're speaking with the person who holds the budget. And if somebody is following this and they may get off of that call and they're not talking to the right person, well, then they know that what they need to do is figure out the next steps to get that person on the phone. Because if they just keep moving through the process and do that demo, they're selling their heart out to the wrong person. The deal's going to stall or probably get lost.
Yeah.
So the methodology, and so there's the what, right? So
Mhm.
here's your sales process. This is the what to do. So define the steps. Some companies have 7 steps, some have 5. It's basically getting from prospecting to discovery to close to post sale. Define that. Step 1, step 2, define what each of those means and how to exit them. And then the sales methodology. And the methodology is a lot juicier, but that's okay, now let's say, with the example I just gave, let's say you're on the phone and this person doesn't hold the budget, but he or she is saying, trust me, my boss gives me complete authority. I'm sure all salespeople have been in that, can understand this one. My boss gives me complete authority. I just make decisions. So what do you do then? Now you've got to figure out how to overcome that objective. What's a talk track around that? What are some questions to ask? That's what a methodology is. It's the guidelines to help you get through that, the how to.
Ooh, I love how you just broke that down. And I think the example of the different personas that involve themselves in a sales process is a great way to think about the difference between how you use these. Because we think about all the different buyers that are involved. We've got our user, we've got our champion, our buyer, our signer, our budget holder, procurement, and off a gatekeeper, right? And oftentimes these folks all kind of pretend to be each other, where you have the champion is like, this is my decision. And then when it comes time to actually sign the contract, they're like, actually, it's this person's decision. And that person's like, who are you? Right? Like these things
Yeah.
happen. So I
Yeah.
think that's the perfect way to lay out the intersection of, look, your process is to get these people in these steps at this time and in this order. Now, when you actually have them there, how do we go about uncovering these things? How do we uncover pain or dream states? How do we what are the actual words you're going to use to get you there? That's the perfect way to lay it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so the methodology is really the tools and techniques for communicating with customers or with prospects.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love that. And so when you're looking to enable a sales team, and again, I would go so far as to say that most companies, especially in the B2B tech landscape that are super high growth, they sort of stumble into their sales process where they're like, okay, I know the typical steps and we're kind of doing discovery over here and then a little bit of pitching and demo and the discovery and then we're going to negotiate and then go back to demo and they're kind of bouncing all over the place.
Mhm.
Do you feel like you're able to train on methodology before you have a set, ingrained, repeatable sales process in place?
No, I do not. I think that the sales process is step 1
Yeah.
because you can't really work on the how to do something if you haven't defined the what you're doing. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And a sales process is a lot more common. Not all companies have one, but it's definitely a lot more common and it may not be defined as you and I just defined it, but they'll say we have one. We have something that lives in CRM. We have these sales stages, etc. Methodologies are much less common.
And I think much harder to track because we typically can take a sales process because it's stage driven and we can put
Mhm.
that in our CRM and we can disposition deals based on what stage we're at in our process. A lot of companies spend a lot of money and time and equity when they decide we want to take on an external methodology and we want to become and embody that methodology. But I feel like so many times it's hard to actually track the success of that. How do you feel like is the best way for companies to adopt a methodology and then actually determine if it's working?
That's That is a huge question.
The big one. Bam.
It's a big one. It's a big one. And I think so I'll break it down. I think the most basic answer is to provide the technology and the structure, right? Like we talked about. So create those clear guidelines and provide the right resources to help the team be successful, So again, like I said, make sure that you have those clearly defined activities and exit criteria that everyone's adhering to. But I think that second is use data to understand what good looks like, because you can't really track anything until you use the data.
Yeah.
Have KPIs, CRM hygiene, conversational intelligence tools with trackers is a good way that I see some people doing that in the sales enablement space or in the sales leadership space. And so you just, all right, here's our methodology and we're going to, before we talk about price, we want to make sure that you're speaking to the ultimate decision maker and you can
Yes.
set trackers and things like that. And then there's the accountability piece, right? And salespeople have a ton of competing priorities. And I think that having an effective sales methodology is focusing on driving behavior change and adoption with the goal for a specific outcome, right? Because they have so many competing priorities. And so to be able, in an ideal world, you've got that process, you've implemented a methodology, you're measuring it by conversation intelligence tools and perhaps your sales operations team can track, for example, length in sales stage. So if somebody
Ugh.
is stuck somewhere, you can, if there's good CRM hygiene, right? You could pull back and see if somebody is spending too much time talking to a non budget keeper, or did they give price and then things suddenly went dark? Those types of things. Are they selling on price instead of value? And you could actually create ways to do that. So it's those three things essentially. It's providing the technology and the structure, using the data to understand things, and then holding people accountable.
And you also talked about some phenomenal cross-functional collaboration there too, which is, I don't know if you see this in what you do, but there's often a lack of an agreed upon owner for the output of this, right? It's like, okay, we just instituted a sales methodology and we actually were able to get everybody in the company on the same page that we're going to do the sales methodology. And then it's like that meme of two Spider-Mans pointing at each other where it's like, who actually owns the adoption of that? Is it the sales leaders? Is it the executives? Is it ops? Is it enablement? Is it a combination of them? And so it's hard to get
Mhm.
things done when there's not an owner. So in your experience, who owns the adoption of the methodology? And I know that's a hard question.
That is a hard question, and I think that everyone has skin in the game.
Yeah.
So from different levels, right? So senior leadership senior sales leadership needs to create that culture of adaptability and embed the methodology into your KPIs. Have
Mhm.
those discussions at all hands. Have them in your account plans, for example. How are you leveraging it? Just, create your sales tools with the embedded methodology. Then your frontline managers have to be the cheerleaders, like we mentioned before. So consistent coaching, consistent feedback, constantly examining the health of an opportunity, asking hard questions. There's actually data, I don't know the exact number, but the success of adopting a methodology or any sales tool really is the most reliant on your frontline managers.
Wow.
Well, and then there's the sales reps, right? So
Right.
they have to commit to any learning. They have to do role play and practice and do the work. And then sales enablement and sales operations have to help identify those gaps and voids and provide the data and the heavy lift of creating the right platform if they don't have it available yet. So I mean, it's easy for me to say, yeah, everybody just has their own defined rules, but it doesn't happen that easily.
It doesn't. And you also just laid out the fact that because so much of this is reliant on frontline managers, because they really are the ones that are in the weeds and they're listening to the calls and they're hopefully coaching their reps really consistently. That also means that your entire front line, or ideally as many people as possible in the revenue producing org, regardless of title or hierarchy, need to be fully trained on that methodology. They need to be as good or better at that methodology than the folks on their teams, one, so that they can inspect the methodology as their teams are using it. But two, this is where we usually see adoption drop off, is you train the existing team on a methodology and everyone's going and they've all gotten the training from the company. And then you have a new hire class that comes in and they missed all of that. And the new hire class gets like a weird watered down LaCroix version of whatever the methodology was. And it's like in those moments when you don't have your leadership that can almost train the trainer, it can fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have, boy, did you pinpoint it. And when I was working in sales consulting, I saw that all the time. It was the flavor of the day, right? And it was what we're going to learn today. And the salespeople would sit down and get ready to learn and roll their eyes and say, okay, here we go again. And yeah, and that's a problem. And you can see why if the frontline managers aren't involved and bought in and excited about it, then it is going to fall to the wayside, and it's just going to become another dusty process or tool that gets used.
Yeah. And if you don't know the methodology well enough to identify where, we're not doing that methodology correctly for our product, or we're using that on the wrong time, or the talk track is a little bit off, it's like your leaders have to be maniacally trained on this stuff. And then especially leaning into this use case of where I hear so much pain around trying to adopt not even a sales process, but the methodology on top of it, is that exact example of our entire company just went through comprehensive long-term methodology training, pick your flavor. And now
Yep.
all of those people are trained likely by the experts themselves. And now every employee after that joining the organization needs to have that same level of understanding, but they don't necessarily have the ability to continue to provide that level of training. And maybe that's a tough question too, but how do companies solve for that without forever having to keep a $150,000 line item on their budget to keep training new people from an outside source on their methodology?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I don't know if there is a best answer to that. What I've seen in some companies is the sales enablement team
Yeah.
is trained on the methodology and then is responsible for helping the new hires ramp up. Another is, I've seen other companies, you purchase enough of the assets and resources to be able to create their own continuing content for those things. But every company I've talked with or been in has that problem. How do
Yeah.
we get people ramped to where our current folks are today? What I've done, what I've seen works, it may not be the best way to do it, but it's just shadowing, right? It's shadowing people, it's providing the resources, a lot of role play.
Mm.
This is what we do if. And so, and again, it's providing those resources, the talk tracks, the questioning strategies, objection handling tools, just, how do you, this is our sales process, and here are some of our standard objections. And so, these are things that could be created in any company, regardless of what your methodology is. Here are some questioning strategies to overcome these specific objections, and try and make it as pointed as possible for your company. If
Well,
someone
you're
isn't paying the continuous, the
right.
gazillion dollars.
Right. And I mean, you and I both know that is a big line item. And not to say that it's not worth it, but that's a big line item that you may not be able to have on the budget forever for every new hire class, especially if your new hire classes are getting smaller and smaller or more spread
That's
out,
right.
So
And to your point, can you quantify the value? It's hard to quantify the value. And
yes.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
It truly is. And so thinking in terms of one, I love that you laid out different elements of kinesthetic learning, where the best thing to do is think about learning most things by sitting in a classroom and learning them. But once you've had that classroom training once with the core group that you have, all the other elements of kinesthetic hands-on learning of like, look, you don't have to sit in the classroom and learn this like the initial landing group did, because now we have calls, now we have worksheets, now we have role plays, now we have different elements for you to actually experience expressing the methodology before you go and do it on the phone. Whereas the initial class that went through the traditional training, they didn't have that. They didn't have calls to listen to. They didn't have those elements to kind of train that. So I actually think you're laying out a pretty scalable way and a different way to adopt the methodology, but is probably pretty effective, which is helpful.
It is helpful, yeah. And what I did for fourth quarter of last year for a specific team that I mapped to is ran a weekly role play session. And so prior to that session, everybody was invited to come and we had a specific topic based on what I heard from the field. Like this is an objection that we're hearing a lot, or here's an issue that we're having. And we would just role play and that I got some good feedback on that. That was helpful for people. And all I did was, invite everybody and put the topic and they did the work.
They did it. All right. Potentially, all I'm going to do today, Dina, is just ask you difficult questions. So thanks for being open to this. But how do you get people to be open to role play consistently? Because if you're like a lot of how I felt when I was selling X amount of years ago, not going to age myself, whenever somebody says role play, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, I know that's helpful, but the idea of role play creates this like pit where it's like, oh God, I have to role play and it's uncomfortable. And like, did you have a way to make that more easily digestible to, oh my gosh, do it on a weekly basis?
So first of all, yes, it's brutal, right? And people just they would rather stick something sharp in their retina. But I think that one of the first things we did was we uninvited managers. So
Oh,
managers were not invited on this call. This was teammates only, team members only. And so that helped a bit for a safe space. And in the beginning, we talked about the role plays they were kind of easy. We started out easy, so we weren't throwing curveballs, and so it just got easier and easier. But I absolutely do not have the secret sauce to how to make people feel that role play is something that's fun. I don't know, but eliminating uninviting managers seemed to help a bit.
yeah. And I dig deeper into that because I know that a lot of companies will want leaders to be in the role plays so that they can, wrong word, but judge what happens and then determine where coaching needs to exist. The decision to take leaders out of that room, I think, makes it immediately a bit more comfortable. But then also, like, how does it work for managers to then get a good idea of the level of ingrainment and practicing?
Well, at our company, we have some conversation intelligence tools, and so the managers are doing a lot of coaching around that and listening there. Where that isn't in practice, you're right. And perhaps what could happen is, well, I mean, do you agree that the more you do role play, the easier it is? I'm not saying pleasant, but easier.
Yeah, it is a muscle. It's a muscle
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
yeah. And so if you're building that role play muscle without the judgment of your leader, perhaps it's easier when your leader does say, "All right, let's do some role play during our one-on-one," or whatever the case may be.
I could not possibly agree with you more because I used to find when I was leading sales teams at prior companies that when I would listen to calls after the fact via gong chorus, whatever it may be, I felt like I was getting more of the real understanding of how they're using the sales process and their methodology versus when I would join a call live. I almost feel like performance in the moment would drop because they were in their head so much about, let me make sure that I do this perfectly. And they're not usually thinking that when they're actually on calls. They're just going back to what's comfortable, right? And then when we ask them to role play with the new methodology, it can feel like, okay, well, go ahead and write your name with your non dominant hand. And you're like, look, while you're sitting here watching me, I'll do that, but it's going to be messy. And then when you're not on the call, I'm going to kind of go back to my old way of doing things. And so to me, it's the more we get comfortable writing with our non-dominant hand combined with practicing it, you almost have to have an up leveling there where they start to merge and then writing with the non-dominant hand starts to feel kind of comfortable. And you're like, you know
Yeah,
what? This starts to feel better. But like, you're so right. It's always going to be messy and super uncomfortable at the start. And that's okay.
yeah. And to go with your writing analogy, which I love, sometimes when I've seen managers join calls and they kind of get in the driver's seat, right? And so
Yeah.
they're writing for them instead. And so I would argue that that's not a great way for sales reps to learn. And so that's why doing a role play without the managers and figuring things in a safe space, figuring things out and making the mistake and doing it again without, well, here's how I would do it, which
Mm.
sometimes could happen with the manager. It's helpful.
It's like you just hit the nail on the head of where my mind was so aggressively. And this is why I adore you because you track so often, but so many leaders accidentally do that when they're coaching their reps. The verbiage that they use is, here's what I would have said, and here's what I would have done, and here's how I would have approached that, and this is where I would have gone. And the reality is you're telling your rep, not here's what the methodology and process tells us to do, so let's figure out how we get there. It's perfection to me looks like you understanding what I would have done and being like me. And a great sales leader is, you don't have to do it like me. We want to do this successfully. And there's more than
Right.
one way to get there. That small change and how you coach people and what you say can make all the difference.
Agreed. Oh, agree so much. Yeah,
I mean, it's your point. I
absolutely.
just restated it. It's the exact point you just made, and I just said it more. I was like, I'm going to say what Dina said. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it louder. But that's brilliant. And the last question I have for you before we get to our rapid reveal section is how marketing plays a role in this. And I knew that was going to make you laugh because how often do you see the producers take on a methodology and have an entire go-to-market motion built around that, and marketing is left completely out of the loop on those talk tracks?
Yes, I think that a lot of sales leaders might say that they have a love-hate relationship with
Mhm.
marketing. And I think that we need marketing for a lot of things. We need marketing for all of our go to market anything, for all of our customer facing anything, for to help us understand data, predictive data, etc. So we we need marketing. And so were you asking the question of what do I think about marketing, or what exactly was your question?
What a wonderful quote. What do you think about marketing, Tina? What were tell me just what you
What do
think.
you really think about marketing?
What role do you feel like marketing should play at the company when the sales team is deciding to take on a methodology? How do
Mm.
they determine what they do with that messaging and how they use it?
Oh, got it. Okay, so yes, I think that marketing it is crucial to helping with specific things like, for example, buyer personas. There's something that I think very specifically is important for marketing to understand, right? And so marketing is good at going out there and understanding the market and, scraping the market for data and predictive data of how this industry is responding to this and what they're thinking, and this buyer persona is responding to this and what they're thinking. And now I'm going to help you with the talk tracks around that are specific to our industry, our company, our product, our service, etc. So that's how I think marketing and the sales methodology work together.
I agree. I feel like marketing needs to understand the talk tracks and stories about the product and process that the sales teams are using, because even your PMM or your customer marketing teams need to understand, how are we going to market? What is the vision? What are we saying? And what do we want people to feel? And your marketing team can help with that in the initial outreach. It can almost take on that methodology via your campaigns or your pay-per-click ads. But oftentimes you can tell when you're working with a company and the sales team has been trained in a methodology and marketing has been left out of the loop, because it's almost like they're speaking two different languages. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. And
echoing
marketing does
involved
so
marketing.
much to help,
Yes.
to help companies understand the market, that the specific market they're trying to sell to.
Yes. I feel like going on about sales process and methodology, especially you and I both being people that are often enabling sales reps to do their jobs more effectively, we could geek out about this for far
Oh,
too long.
oh my gosh, I could geek about it. And I do have one final thought on a sales methodology. I was thinking about
Yes.
this just before I joined your call. It really A sales methodology helps develop sales skills because it could act as a playbook. And so for companies that are trying to figure out how to upskill their salespeople or create that playbook, there's another reason to have a sales methodology.
Oh my gosh. See, look, now I want to go dig into that more. It was such a good, it's gonna have to be a gonna have to be a part two, but I can't take all of your day. And so if you're up for it, let's transition over to our rapid reveal. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, we have 5 questions for you. You've
Mhm.
got 60 seconds or less to answer each. So let's dive in. I like to get
Okay.
heavy with this one, but what is your earliest childhood memory?
Ooh, I have a good one and a bad one, and I'll share the good one.
Ooh.
Um,
Oh.
Sitting sitting on the floor of the back seat of my parents' car driving across country to see family. I didn't want to sit on the seat, and I very specifically remember being I was, however old I was little, and I was sitting like in a ball on the floor. I was happy as could be, and I could still remember my mother saying, "Why is she on the floor?" to my brother and sister. Obviously, this was before car seats and caution, but that's one of my earliest memories.
Well, hopefully the bad memory isn't what happened right after that.
No. No, no, it was a great memory. I was very happy down there.
Well, now I feel like I need to hear the bad memory, just because now I'm wondering what it is. You don't have to share.
So the
if you
bad
don't want.
memory, here's something that's interesting, a little play on psychology. The bad memory is me sitting in the kitchen chair of my own house, finding out that my uncle had passed away on Christmas Eve. Now,
Oh,
I have that memory so specific. What I learned is that didn't happen at all. We weren't in my house. So isn't that funny? That's a very vivid memory, but it's wrong.
okay. See, this is fascinating because
Mhm.
I would be willing to bet that I have childhood memories that feel like they are like inside out, like a core memory. And I was like, did it actually happen that way though? It's like your mind puts the pieces together in the absence of like actually having the facts. So you fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, I
yeah.
have what people were wearing, what I was wearing, how I was sitting on the chair, all of it, and it didn't even happen. It didn't happen, which I learned much later into adulthood, just having conversations with cousins about it,
Oh my God. And then you
older
just sit there
cousins.
with that. Yeah. You sit there with that like,
Hmm.
well, we'll
What
let
else is
everyone sit
wrong
with
in my
that.
memory?
What else is wrong in your memory? I love it. That could lead us into number 2, maybe, maybe not. But what is an irrational fear of yours?
I am afraid of the dark. I've
Oh,
always been afraid of the dark, and when my husband goes out of town traveling, I sleep with the light on.
really? Do you sleep with the light
Mhm.
on, like when you go to hotels and stuff?
If I'm alone. Mhm.
Yeah. I am consistently afraid when I'm in hotels that somebody is hiding in my room. It's
Oh,
irrational,
okay.
but
Interesting. Do you sleep with
but
the light on in
I
a
try
hotel?
to I try to fall asleep with the TV on as if there's an intruder, the TV will be the thing that is like, "You know what? Not today. She's watching
Today,
Maury
the
at
TV is
2
on.
AM. We're not gonna we're not gonna mess with her." It doesn't but it's just like, yeah, right? Where those things where you're like, yeah, so like every time I go into my hotel room, I open every door, I check everything, and then I lock the door. And it's like, I'm just this idea of like someone's in my room and they're hiding, they're gonna murder me.
Mhm.
Anyway. All
Yeah,
right. Number,
my people are under the bed. There's always someone under
oh,
the bed.
so you can't hang
Mhm.
your foot off the end because,
Mm-mm, no way.
yeah,
No.
yeah. We're gonna let that sit as well. Number 3, what was the last skill you learned?
A crow pose in yoga.
Oh, what does that look like?
Yeah. So it's an inversion. I'm not very good at it, but I was able to hold it longer than ever before. So I still have a ways to go. But you're balancing yourself on your arm. So your knees are in your
Oh,
arms, and you're balancing. Yeah, it's
all right.
pretty
Well,
cool.
next time I see you, I'm gonna have you show
We'll
that to
do
me.
it.
We're gonna
Okay.
do it. God, that might lead into number 4. Number 4, what does self-care mean to you?
Oh, well, yeah, I love yoga, so that's it for sure. But on broader than that, it's putting in the effort to take care of your brain, your body, and your soul, and then also giving yourself permission to be human, not a machine, right? So people who just think, that they have these aspirations that are in my mind just kind of crazy, and then make themselves feel bad about it. That's kind of the opposite of self-care.
Oh, permission to be human. Yes. Yes. Number 5, who is your favorite fictional character?
Do you watch New Girl?
No.
Have you ever watched New Girl?
I'm
Mm.
aware of it. I'm aware of it.
Um, there's a character named Schmidt from New
Okay.
Girl.
Right.
I love him. I want him to be my friend.
He's the one.
He's
I
it.
love it. See, look, we can end on a light note. And I have to say, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for getting so tactical with me and letting me really drill in and ask you some of the tough questions. And I imagine folks, given your experience and what they've heard today, are going to want to meet you, talk to you, hear more about what your company does. So where can folks find you?
Oh, so my email is the best way. And should I just give that right now?
Sure.
Sure. So it's my first name and last name, Dina.Gallay at relativity.com. And I would love to hear from people.
Wonderful. Well, can't thank you enough for coming on the show and
Thank
sharing
you.
your expertise.
Thank you. Lots of fun.
Good. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Taking the Lead. If you're looking for more inspiring stories from women leaders in B2B tech, then visit us at motionagency.io/takingthelead.